Hello, and welcome to this brief recap on the Storywriting Social, Part 1. Just a quick note, this is to give you all the hints and tips and insights and information you should need to write your story, whether that would be a novel, a short story, your life story, or a tale of these strange, troubled coronavirus times. Everything you need in the Storywriting Social in a series of 6, and this will be about a 10-minute summary of Part 1. A brief word about myself. I've had a few novels published. I teach communications at the university here in Cambridge and also in various government departments and for businesses. I was a news correspondent for 20 years with the BBC, and I also run my own media and public relations agency, Creative Warehouse. So let's get on with it. And at any point during this, I will be doing some interactions. You are very welcome to pause so you can find out whether you can work out the answer to my question before we go on to reveal it. So we're going to do this as an A to Z, and A to Z, every single letter of the alphabet, to outline everything you need to know to write the story that you want to write. So let's start with the letter A. Any guesses what A is? And remember, you can pause here and have a think before I reveal it. A is angle, the angle. And you get these cute little slides as well, because I like doing things like that. It's part of the fun of being a presenter. Angle. Angle is about being able to sum up your story in just one sentence so that it keeps you on the narrative track, i.e. you know exactly what you're writing about when you're writing. But on top of that, it also means you can explain what your story is about very simply, very straightforwardly, if anybody should be interested, and hopefully perhaps a literary agent or a publisher. To explain A, angle, I'm going to do a little game, the like of which you sometimes see on social media. I'm going to sum up books and films in just a handful of words, and you have to try to see if you can guess what they are. So, what film and book is this? Strange group of misfit friends spend 9 hours returning jewelry. What's that? Remember, you can pause here if you want to try and work out what the answer is. And the answer is Lord of the Rings. What about this one? Fishing trip goes really badly wrong. Any guesses? That one is Jaws. Mad factory owner maims children one by one in front of their parents. Any thoughts? That one is Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. Feels rather different as a story when you look at it that way, doesn't it? What about this one? Leonardo DiCaprio wanders a frozen wasteland in search of an Oscar. These are all quite tongue-in-cheek, but any guesses what that is? It's a film. That is The Revenant. Teenage crush ends in double suicide. Very famous. Play, book, film. That's Romeo and Juliet. Father and son don't get along. Universe suffers. What's that one? That's Star Wars. So these have all been quite fun, a bit of tongue-in-cheek, but you can do it a bit more straight and serious. For example, just as our last little exercise on this A for angle, how to restore hope in life when all seems lost. You will all know that immediately because it's my latest book, The Editor. You should never be an author and not get a plug-in for your latest book. That's a little bit more serious, but still short and simple, sums up what the book is about. And that's your angle. An angle is important to know what you're writing about. It'll keep you on that thread, keep you on your track with your story. And it also enables you to sum up what your story is about if ever you should be asked about it, which is useful. Okay, so moving on to B in our odyssey through the alphabet of the Storywriting Social. And B, any guesses what B is? Have a quick pause, see if you can work it out. This is important, short but important. Okay, B is bravery. I'm about to show you something which you might find surprising. You might be younger watching this, but whatever age you are, I'll bet you've heard of Fawlty Towers, the brilliant, classic, iconic British comedy, one of the finest we have ever produced by common consent. Now, when John Cleese originally wrote Fawlty Towers with Connie Booth, his then wife, he sent it off to the BBC to see if they might be interested in making it as a series. Now, this is Fawlty Towers we're talking about. Generally held to be a work of genius, hilarious, still being shown now. I absolutely love it. What did the BBC think of Fawlty Towers? I'll show you. Have a read of that. As dire as its title, Prince of Denmark of the hotel world, cliché stock characters I can't see being anything but a disaster. Isn't that remarkable? That's what the BBC initially made of Fawlty Towers. Extraordinary, isn't it? Looking back, thinking that. So B is bravery. As a writer, you will face rejections and you will sometimes be hurt because people will say what you're doing is no good. That's life. You can't please everyone. Some works which people think are great, others think are awful, and likewise. You have to be brave to be a writer. You're giving away something of your soul, something that means a lot to you. And that's a scary moment. But in order to show it to other people, you don't have to, you just keep it to yourself. But you have to be brave if you're ever going to show your writing to other people because you're exposing a bit of your soul. So remember, if anyone ever knocks your writing, you've got to be brave and keep going, carry on, because that's a rejection for Fawlty Towers. Iconic comedy. Okay, let's move on to C. I bet you can't guess what C is from this. Who doesn't love the Mr. Men? Yes, of course, you've got it. C is characters. Characters. Characters are absolutely fundamental to writing. Characters are one of the most important building blocks. So I'm going to spend a few minutes now talking about characters and the way I see them. And the way I look at characters when I'm building up characters is to use this fella, the iceberg model of characterization. Now, interestingly, whether you're writing fiction or non-fiction, this still works. It works whether you're building up a fictional character or indeed whether you're assessing and trying to understand a real person, a non-fiction character. So how does a character iceberg work? Well, there are 3 stages to talk about. The first one, I'll ask this. How much of an iceberg is above the surface? What percentage? Have a think for a second, see if you can tell me. Okay, it's about 10%. Now, what am I paralleling there with the theory of characterization? It's this. If somebody new walked into the room right now, and unlikely given the coronavirus crisis, I know, but if they did, the first thing we clock about them is what they look like, what they're wearing. So the first part of the character iceberg is appearance, what people look like. Important, not the most important part, but nonetheless important. So let's spend a few minutes looking at that. The trick with appearance is to say enough about someone to describe what they're like a little bit, but not go too far. I think of the imagination as this beautiful boat on this wonderful sea it can explore. The trick here is to push the boat just so it gets going and let it run. That's the wonderful thing about imagination. It can do so much. So try and say a bit about your character, but not too much. Some examples, some famous examples. Character descriptions. Again, let's do this as a little quiz for some fun. And don't forget, you can pause when I've given you the description, see if you can get it before I give you the answer. What about this? Slim build, 3-inch long, thin vertical scar on his right cheek, blue-grey eyes, a cruel mouth, short black hair, a comma of which falls on his forehead. Any guesses? Pause if you want to think about it. That is James Bond. Now, not a lot of description of Bond in the books, but enough to set rise to an absolute legend. So that's James Bond. And notice there, you're talking mostly what he looks like. There's a bit of a sense of the aura of the man when the description goes into it being a cruel mouth, but mostly what he looks like. Let's have a look at some others, including some iconic description of a character. I saw that everything within my view, which ought to be white, had been white long ago and had lost its luster and was faded and yellow. I saw that the bride within the bridal dress had withered like the dress and like the flowers and had no brightness left but the brightness of her sunken eyes. I saw that the dress had been put upon the rounded figure of a young woman and that the figure upon which it now hung loose had shrunk to skin and bone. One of the most famous pieces of description in the English language. Who's that? Pause if you want to think about it. Who's that? Yeah, that's Miss Havisham, Dickens, Miss Havisham. Jilted at the altar and never got over it. Frozen in that moment in time. Beautiful description, very powerful. It's lived down the years. And again, look at it. It's all about what she looks like. What she looks like there. But there are other ways to describe characters, and we'll just come on to that in a sec. But a couple more first. His very person and appearance was such as to strike the attention of the most casual observer. His eyes were sharp and piercing, and his thin, hawk-like nose gave his whole expression an air of alertness and decision. His chin, too, had the prominence and squareness which mark the man of determination. His hands were invariably blotted with ink and stained with chemicals, yet he was possessed of extraordinary delicacy of touch. Who's that? Again, pause if you want to think about it. Well, that is Sherlock Holmes. And again, a legendary character, but not a great deal of description about him in the books. So again, an awful lot about what he looks like, but also a sense of the man as well, his aura, the air of alertness and decision, the man of determination. And then look how you can also go into that in more detail with this next description, how it doesn't have to just be about what someone looks like, but it can be very much about what they feel like as well. Who's this? A criminal strain ran in his blood, which was rendered infinitely more dangerous by his extraordinary mental powers. Dark rumors gathered around him. The Napoleon of crime, the greatest schemer of all time, the organizer of every devilry, the controlling brain of the underworld. Who's that? Well, that is Moriarty, Holmes' legendary enemy. Now look at that. Nothing about what he looks like, but an awful lot about what he feels like, the aura, the thing the man does. So those are your two weapons you have in terms of character descriptions. What someone looks like, of course, but what someone feels like as well, the aura they give off. And you can use a mix and match of the both. So I should mention as well as we go along, feel free to do little exercises. Pause this. To start with, you could do an exercise on angle. See if you can sum up the angle of your story that you're going to write in just one sentence. See if you can sum up your main character. Now, just a paragraph or so of description, what they look like, but also what they feel like as well. And then we can move on.